Hello AOS fans!
Hello everybody and welcome to the next video in our How to Play Warhammer Underworlds series. Today we're going to be looking at activations, and so we're going to be looking at moving, charging, attacking, going on guard.
All those things.
All the things, yes.
Of the activations we're going to cover in this, it's worth pointing out that you can only do one of them in each of your activations.
Yeah, you get 4 activations in a turn, and for each of those activations you will activate one fighter and you can do one of these things. Charge, as you will see, is made up of 2 separate things. It's a super action, but effectively, you can one charge is one action.
Yes, you can't move and go on guard at the same time. You can't move and do an attack other than as part of a charge. You can't attack twice, for example.
No, absolutely not. So just bear that in mind when looking at these things. Each action is just one of these things that you can do, and you can only do one fighter per turn. It's not like other Games Workshop games where you move everybody at once. In your turn, it is literally one activation, one fighter.
There are some reactions that might change this, but they are the exception to the rule, and they will be suitably detailed on their cards.
And we'll start with movement.
Yes.
So I'm going to start by placing Scaeth the Huntsman on the board. Let's imagine he's on a starting hex waiting to be activated.
And I'm going to put old Grashrak on the board as well.
Grashrak.
Maybe going to come running after you.
The 2 leaders from the Beastgrave box.
So when you make a movement activation, you declare that you're going to move a fighter, and then you have to refer to the fighter card. As we covered in one of our previous videos, there's a little hex in the bottom left corner, and that has a number in it, and that determines how many hexes you can move. Now you can move up to that many hexes, but you can move less if you want, and there are a few rules that you need to remember when moving a fighter. One of the first rules is you can't move through another fighter. I can't jump over Scaeth like that and end up in a different hex. I would have to go round him, and that can be a problem because, in this case, Grashrak only moves 4, so I'd have to go 1, 2, 3, 4, like that.
It's not so much a problem because you've gone to the same place. But if you could go through, obviously you could be off over the board.
And off in a different world,
yeah,
yes.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing. You cannot move through your fighters or enemy fighters.
Similarly, for Scaeth, if Scaeth wasn't half horse but was in fact half chicken and wanted to run away from Grashrak, he couldn't go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 all the way over here. He has a movement characteristic of 5, but you're not allowed to move through blocked hexes. So if I wanted to move 5 away, I would have to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's a small but subtle difference because he ends up in the same place again. And actually you will find, especially with the faster moving fighters, that you can get a lot of places on the board. It's quite hard to restrict movement in a game of Warhammer Underworlds, I find anyway.
Yes, it can be, depending on the warband you're fighting against. The next thing is obviously lethal hexes. If you move through a lethal hex like so, 1, 2, that would cause a wound to Grashrak. In fact, even if I just moved 1 and stopped on the lethal hex, I would still take a wound.
Yes. And there are obviously sometimes reasons to do that. Sometimes you might help you score a particular objective, or sometimes you just need that extra hex of movement to get to where you want to go.
Exactly, and so therefore moving through or stopping on a lethal hex will do a wound. If there were multiple lethal hexes, or if I went 1, 2, 3, 4 for whatever reason, that would do 2 wounds to me.
Yes, you've covered an extra thing there, Pete. You don't have to take the most direct route to get from A to B. It's a slightly odd rule, and there are reasons why you might want to do it, but you can run a small circle as long as you don't end up exactly back where you started. So if I for some reason needed to make a movement of 5, I could go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to there, which is exactly the same as going 1, 2 to there, but I have moved 5 rather than 2, which might be a subtle difference needed for an objective or something like that. It's a slightly curious rules quirk, but I think with the way the hex works, the way the hexes work, there isn't any other way around it. So though it can sometimes be slightly counterintuitive, it is allowed, and you just have to get used to it, I think.
One of the last things to bear in mind is, for it to be a valid move, you do have to end in a different hex, as Robin sort of mentioned a minute ago. You cannot go 1, 2, 3 and count that as a movement. You have to end on a complete different hex. So 1, 2, 3, 4 is absolutely fine, even though I've only moved from there to there. It's still a move. At the end of that movement, you would then take a movement token and you place it next to your fighter like so.
And as we've placed tokens, it's probably worth covering a little bit about the tokens because they do restrict you from doing certain things, depending if you have tokens on them. These guys have both moved, and they can no longer move. You can only move once in Warhammer Underworlds during an activation. Once you've got a movement token on you, you can't move anymore. And there are other ways of acquiring movement tokens, which we'll cover perhaps in later videos. But for the moment, generally speaking, once you've activated, you move, you get a movement token, you can no longer move. But you can do other things. You can go on guard, which we'll cover. You can still attack, which again we'll cover in a second. But you cannot move.
And at the end of a round, you would then take all of the tokens off the board.
Yes, so once you've had your 4 activations, if you remember from our previous video, you then move to the end phase and you remove all the tokens.
So the next, and possibly one of the most important things you can do in Underworlds, is you can attack somebody.
Yep, you're trying to kill your opponent, and pretty much the only way to do it is to attack them. This is a game of combat after all.
So in this example here, Draknar is facing off against Skaeth the Huntsman, and he wants to whack him in the face with his obsidian blade.
Yes, we covered the attack options in our fighter card video, but Grushrak has, as Pete just said, an obsidian blade, and that has an attack rating of 2 hammers.
So I would roll my dice, and let's say I get this result.
Okay, so Pete is rolling his attack dice, and he has rolled 1 hammer and 1 single assist.
So it's important to note at this point that means I have 1 success because I have a hammer on my profile.
He has no fighters on his own warband helping him, so he doesn't get to use the single assist. We'll cover that in a second.
So then Robin has to roll his defense dice.
Okay, so I look at my defense characteristic, and for Skaeth the Huntsman, it is 1 shield, 1 dodge,
Oh,
which is a failure.
So that means in this situation I look at my card again and I can see that I do 2 damage to Skaeth. So he has 4 wounds at the minute and has been reduced to 2.
Oh, so he goes down to 2 damage, so he's halfway to being dead, which is not a good state to be in.
Not very much. Another thing that I can do at this point as well is I can push him back. Now, when I push him back, I have to push him to a hex that's further away. That means I could push him here, or I could push him to here, but I cannot push him into a blocked hex here.
Yep, and you could not also push him around the corner there because that is not further away, they're still adjacent to him. So
yes, you have to make sure that there are more hexes in between you and your opponent after the push. So now there's 1 hex in between us, but here there were no hexes in between us. Normally it's quite easy to see where you can push someone. It can be a bit trickier if you're attacking someone who's at a range. If I had a range 2 attack in this example and I had to push him back, I would have to push him to either here or here because there has to be that extra hex in between us at the end.
So Pete there rolled what is called a successful attack. But actually you can have an unsuccessful attack where you can still push back. So let's imagine that Pete had done his hammer and single assist attack. And he's hit me, and this time I'm rolling my dice. And this time, as fate would have it, I'm slightly more fortunate. And I roll a shield, which is what I need to block your attack. Woo! So I don't take 2 damage.
You do not.
And I'm therefore feeling much haler and heartier than I was in the first attack.
Now, it's worth pointing out, though, that whilst this is a failed attack, I can still push you back.
Because it is a tie. My shield is 1 success, and Pete's hammer is 1 success.
And again, the same pushback applies where I can either move him to here or here, but it must be further away than when he first started.
Yes, it's exactly the same, but I don't take damage, so I'm better off because I did roll 1 success. Now, if Pete had rolled 0 successes, so he only got supports there, he didn't get any successes, he could not push me back. That would be a failed attack and with no possibility of pushback. So that's kind of like my best case scenario. Now, things get a little bit more interesting if either of us roll critical hits. So let's imagine for a moment that Pete managed to roll 1 critical hit. So Pete has scored a crit. People get very excited when you roll crits because they're quite hard to stop. As you can see, I've still rolled 1 success, my shield, but it's no good. Because it's not a critical success, it is only a success, and criticals override successes. Imagine, if you will, that I actually had 3 defense dice, and I managed to roll 3 shields.
Oh my god!
Which surely defends any attack.
No.
But no, a critical success ignores all ordinary successes. So no matter how many I roll, if I roll 10 shields, Pete's single crit would be enough to give him the victory in that scenario.
Yes, so it's worth rolling as many crits as you can, but it gets a little bit more confusing again, because if I roll 1 crit and Robin also rolls a crit on his dice, we're back to a draw again because we both have 1 crit. In this situation, it's a failed attack, but I can push him back 1 hex like I did before.
Because we've rolled an equal number of critical successes.
Yes, and this is where you want to start rolling more dice where you can, because if I rolled a crit and a hammer, Well, what's happened here, a bit like our roll-offs we covered in a different video, is the number of crits cancel each other out, but I have one more success left with my hammer, which means once more I've beaten Robin.
Yes, and again, he can push me back, and in this circumstances, I would also take the 2 damage.
Exactly, because it is a successful attack. I have rolled more successes overall than Robin has. It gets a bit more complicated when you start rolling more dice. In this situation, we both have 1 crit and 1 success, so we're back to it being a draw and a failure. The easiest way to try and work out who has won in an attack and a defense roll-off is to first count the number of crits. If either of you has more crits than the opponent, the person with the most crits wins.
Absolutely.
If the crits are drawn, then you have to start counting up how many other successes you have after the crits. Whoever has the most successes there is still the winner. If you end up with a draw at that point, in this example, then the overall result is a tie.
And if it is a tie, then you are allowed to push back, but no damage is done. Just to reiterate, if I had managed to be lucky and got that 1 in 36 chance and pulled up 2 crits,
Whoa.
then I've blocked Pete's attack, because although he has 2 successes, he only has 1 critical success. I have 2 critical successes, and I win, and Pete can't push me back. He has fluffed his attack.
I have massively whiffed. If I were to roll 3 dice and get a crit and 2 hammers, I still lose because Robin's 2 crits is more than my 1 crit.
Comparing crits first, I've got 2, Pete's got 1, therefore my roll is better. However, if Pete did roll a second crit, his 2 crits cancel out my 2 crits, and he's left with 2 successes.
Whoop, whoop. It's worth pointing out at this stage that some of these are termed critical attacks and critical defences. It's only a critical attack or a critical defence if you win. So if we both rolled 1 crit, it's a tie, and therefore there is no critical attack or critical defence occurring.
But it is worth mentioning that if the number of crits is tied, but it's still a success for Pete with Grashrak, in this case here, that would still count as a critical success, even though our criticals were equal.
And in this example, where Robin has rolled a crit and a success, and I've only rolled 1 crit, that's a critical defence because Robin has rolled a crit and he has won the defence roll as well. In certain other situations, you might be dealing with a ranged attack, such as this one here from Ushkor. He has a range of 3, which means I can shoot at Robin Skaeth, the Huntsman, from 3 hexes away. In this example, I'm only 2 hexes away, so he could even be back here when I shoot at him. The same process follows. You roll the number of dice for your attack, and your opponent rolls the number of dice for the defense, and you cause damage if you win, just like before. Pushback can be a little bit trickier to work out here, because in this situation it's hard to tell where to push them back. The easiest way to work that out is to count the number of hexes in between their starting and ending location. In this case, I'm 1, 2, 3 hexes away. If I were to push him to here, I'm still 1, 2, 3 hexes away, so that's not a valid pushback spot. If I were to push him to here though, 1, 2, 3, 4, he's now further away from me, and that's a valid pushback location.
Yeah, and in this example, Pete, this is a very valuable pushback because Skaeth also has his own range attack, but you are now 4 hexes away, so Skaeth cannot make that attack without moving first.
Exactly.
Or possibly doing a charge move, which we'll come on to in a moment.
It's also worth reminding you as well that at this point, there's a blocked hex here, and I can't push him into that one, even though it would be a valid point to push him back to.
In this situation, you may notice that Ushkor has got his back against the back of the board. Before we roll any dice, if we just look at the possibilities for pushback for Ushkor here, if Skaeth were to successfully attack Ushkor and wants to push him back, if he pushes, at the moment there is 1, 2 squares between Ushkor and Skaeth. If I were to hit Ushkor and move him, if I moved him to here, there would still be 1, 2 squares, so he wouldn't be further away. And if I pushed him here, there would be 1, 2 squares, so he wouldn't be further away again. So I can't push Ushkor further away from me, which means Ushkor is trapped. He literally has his back against the wall. In this case, if I rolled a success for Skaeth, it's exactly the same. Ushkor would take damage, except I can't push him back, so I couldn't move him, but he'd still take the damage.
If we rolled the same number of successes each, normally this would be a tie and Ushkor wouldn't take any damage, but Robin would still be able to push him back. However, because he can't push him back at all, Ushkor takes the full amount of damage from the attack.
Yeah, he's trapped, and therefore it's got kind of a little extra bonus for the fact that he is in difficulty, and so it counts as a success.
It's also worth pointing out at this point, if he had fighters behind him or blocked hexes, they would all stop him from being pushed back, and therefore you can trap your opponent by getting enough people in the way behind them, and thus guaranteeing damage from a lot of attack.
Trap is quite a powerful tactic to use. If you can trap somebody, it makes your dice considerably more accurate. Now we move on to having multiple fighters on the board. and we're going to look at assists. Now, assists is something I get very confused by, Pete, so I'm really glad we're making this video.
Well, yes, assists are basically in the melee of combat. Obviously, the more people on one side, generally the more chance you've got of winning a fight against somebody when you outnumber them. In this case, Grashrak has brought along Ushkor to give him a bit of help to try and take down Skaeth the Huntsman. What this means is when I roll my dice, I can count extra symbols on those dice as successes. The way to work out which symbols you can use is by counting the number of people on each side assisting. In this situation, Ushkor is standing next to Skaeth, so he counts as assisting the attack from Grashrak. It's important to note that if Ushkor were next to Grashrak and not Skaeth, he doesn't get to count at all, even though he has a ranged weapon. He has to be standing right next to Skaeth, right up in his face.
Yes, the type of weapon is irrelevant. It's literally, have you got a body next to the person you're fighting? If, however, it was Ushkor fighting, so Ushkor was making the attack, in this situation, Grashrak does provide support for Ushkor's ranged attack. But as Pete said, if Grashrak is making the attack, Ushkor, even though he's got a ranged attack, doesn't count as a support.
And once you've worked out how many supports you have on either side, you then have to work out who has the most. In this situation, I have one support, but Robin has none, and therefore I get what's called single assists because I have one single person helping me. That means that when I roll my dice, this symbol now acts as a success or acts just like a hammer. So if I roll my 2 dice for Grashrak, I've now rolled 2 successes here, 1 single assist and 1 hammer.
So you can immediately see how this is more effective. Skaeth only has 1 defence dice, and if Ushkor wasn't there, his single assist wouldn't count, and therefore it'd only be 1 success. And I would only need 1 success, which is a shield or a crit, which actually is 3 faces of the die, so I have a 50% chance of saving that attack. Only now, because there is an assist, the only way I can beat Pete is to have a critical success, because I can't get 2 successes to cancel that out. So I have to roll a critical, which is only a 1 in 6 chance of saving the day.
And if Grashrak manages to get more of his friends involved, and Gnarl comes along for the fight as well, now I've got 2 people assisting me because I have 2 other of my fighters. Now I can use this symbol to count as a success, and also this symbol. So if I rolled my 2 dice and got this result, I have 2 successes still.
Yes, and there are now only 2 faces on each dice, which don't count as a success for you, Pete, so that's really powerful.
Yes.
It's important to note, and slightly counterintuitive, I think, adding extra fighters doesn't add extra dice. It just makes the dice that you roll give more chance of successes because it makes more faces a success.
Which kind of makes sense in some ways.
It does make sense, but I think it's an easy mistake to make when you first play. You think, well, I've got 3 fighters, I can make extra attacks.
Yes, it just adds the number of successes on the dice itself, not more dice.
Yep.
But not every punch-up is this one-sided, and maybe Skaeth has a few friends along for the ride.
So here comes Rawk. He's coming in to defend his leader. He's moving alongside to try and put Grashrak off.
So in this situation, we have to count up how many people are assisting again. In this case, Robin counts the number of people on his side adjacent to my attacking fighter, which is Grashrak, and I count the number of fighters I have next to the target fighter, which is Skaeth. In this situation, I have 2 fighters, and Robin has 1. So Robin has 1 person assisting, and I have 2. What you now have to do is basically work out who has the most and by how many. In this situation, I have the most fighters, but only by 1. Therefore, now only single assists will count in my roll.
Yep, double assists are no longer useful. So this one with the 2 half moons together is now no longer a success. So if Pete did roll that, that would just be a single success, making Skaeth have more chance of saving the day.
It is worth pointing out, though, that even though Robin has one supporting fighter, this is not a success roll for him because he has less fighters and therefore counts as having no assists at all overall.
Yes, because what we didn't cover in the previous, it's what we didn't cover when we were talking about supports, is that the defence dice have supports on them too. So in a situation where these 2 weren't on the board, I now would have supports on defence if Grashrak was attacking. So that would count as a success. But because if there was either 1 or 2 or any more beastmen in the attack adjacent to Skaeth, then Rawk's presence doesn't actually add anything to the success total.
Now things can get a little bit messy here because if Lighane comes along for a bit of a punch-up as well, he doesn't help at all because Grashrak is over here and he's all the way over here. And it's only the fighters next to the opposition, target or attacker, that you count.
Supporters don't cancel out supporters. So even though Lycaon here is kind of looks like he's supporting Skaeth because he's next to Gnarl. It doesn't matter. It's whether he's next to Grashrak that makes the difference.
Yes.
And I was going to say similarly, if Lycaon wasn't there, you might consider in this situation attacking with Gnarl rather than Grashrak because Shayok here isn't supporting attacks against Gnarl. He's only supporting against attacks from Felhoof.
If Carthane were to appear in the backfield here, he would obviously be helping Skaeth in either of his attacks against Grashrak or Ushkor. He would also be helping in any defence rolls that Skaeth makes that come from Grashrak or Ushkor as well. But as previously mentioned, he doesn't stop Ushkor being a supporter for Grashrak just because he's next to him. A lot of people think that it's a bit like a few of other Games Workshop games where standing next to someone is enough to stop them being of use, but that's not the case here. It's purely based on how many of your fighters are standing next to your opponent's fighter involved in that combat. In this situation as well, if Grashrak were to attack Skaeth, both sides have 2 supporting fighters because Robin has 2 of his fighters next to Grashrak and I have 2 fighters next to Skaeth. In this situation, both sets of fighters cancel each other out as we have the same number and therefore no supports count. If the Cowardly Beastmen do run away though, Grashrak is severely outnumbered here and Robin would now get both single and double assists on his defense dice because he has 2 or more people supporting him.
Some fighters have special abilities on their attacks and these tend to come into the game more once you're inspired. Skaeth, when he's inspired, on his kicking hooves attack has the keyword scything. Now this attack enables you to attack multiple fighters at once in sort of one, literally going around like a big scythe to chop their knees off. And so that's why it's called scything, and it enables you to roll multiple attacks against multiple opponents. You take each attack in turn. So the probabilities of things can change as you go on, so you do have to choose carefully who you attack first. Let's imagine in this sequence, I'm going to start by attacking Ushkor. So I've got a 3-sword attack, and in this attack, which is starting against Ushkor, I've rolled a critical success, an ordinary sword success, and a single assist. Now, does my single assist count as a success here, Pete?
It doesn't, because in this situation, Skaeth is next to Ushkor, but he also has old Gnarl here standing next to him as well, which means I have 1 fighter next to you, and you have no fighters extra next to me. So my single assist here does count as a success.
But mine doesn't.
And yours does not.
However, Pete only has 1 success, and I have 2, and one of those is a critical success. So I definitely win there. So I'm going to deal 2 damage to Ushkor, which is enough to kill Ushkor. Hurrah! Boom! Now, I then move on to Gnarl, because I'm doing a scything attack. So in this attack, I've rolled exactly the same as I rolled last time.
That's lucky.
And yes, it's by the magic of cinema. I still don't have supports because Gnarl has 1 fighter next to him that's mine, and he also has 1 fighter next to him that is Pete's. So my supports don't count. So I have take that one away. I've got a critical success and an ordinary success because I'm rolling swords. So Pete almost managed to save the attack.
Very nearly.
But he rolled a crit, but it's no good, sadly. So that will be 2 damage to Gnarl.
And he'd be off the board as well.
And this is very improbable. If you find when you ever use a scything attack, you never roll, never hit.
Ever.
But finally, Grashrak is now looking a little bit sorry for himself because things are not looking good for him because I now have 3 fighters just on him. I've eradicated 2 of his fighters, so I'm going to get the supports this time. So what do I roll, Pete? Oh, I didn't get a crit, which is a bit of a shame. So I have rolled 3 successes, however, because my sword is a success and my single assist is a success because I have 1 fighter. Well, I actually have 2 fighters, making my double support a success as well. So I've rolled 3 successes. So come on, the Wild Hunt.
I've rolled a crit,
Aha.
which means that despite the fact that Robin rolled 3 successes, he didn't roll any crits, and I beat his roll.
So he beats his roll, so he wins, and I can't even push him back.
You
because
cannot.
He won it hands down.
Grashrak might want to run away soon. Then.
So you have to really think about the order you do your scything attacks in. It becomes it's one of these nuanced things that crop up in the game so often, because generally speaking, the more fighters you kill, the easier the attacks get because you're taking away supports. Because pretty much always somebody you're fighting at the beginning will have a support.
It's also worth pointing out that when you do a scything attack, whilst you count each attack individually, you don't have to do them in a particular order. So you could attack Grashrak first, you could then attack Ushkor and then attack Gnarl last, or you could hit Gnarl and then Ushkor and then Grashrak. There is no specific way of doing it. Whilst it is a scything attack, which makes you feel like it's one great big sweep, you don't really have to do them in any particular order.
No, and it's also worth mentioning that, and we will come on to this in more detail in a future video, but there are various reactions and things you can play, and each attack is counted as a separate attack action. So you might want to save your cards for when you're fighting Grashrak, and you can still do that because the attack action from Skaith counts as a different one. Or if you're attacking, you might have a particular card that boosts an attack action, and you don't have to use that at the start. You can use it in the middle or the end, whichever attack action you're using. You can use it on whichever one you like.
Yes, for example, if Robin were to attack Ushkor to start with and kill him off, I might have a reaction card that I could play, which might enable me to run away Grashrak.
Yeah.
And then he's run away, and poor old Noel is left facing the music on his own.
Yes.
The only other kind of attack to consider here are spell attacks. Now these are slightly special in that they count as spells and as attacks, and that can be important. We'll cover that later on in later videos. But in this situation, Fecula has her Stream of Corruption. Now it's range 3, so Skaith is well within range to make that attack. Attacks, successes and defense successes are still worked out in exactly the same way. In this example, Fecula has rolled 2 focuses and Robin has rolled 1 shield. You count up the successes in exactly the same way as before, so I have 2 successes and Robin only has 1, and therefore I win, I can do him damage, and I can push him back.
Mm-hmm.
Assists work slightly differently in this situation because when you cast a spell attack, you cannot get assists. There are no assists on the dice, but you can get assists for the defense. In this situation, Fecula is trying to attack again against Skaith with her Stream of Corruption, and I've rolled 1 success. Robin, however, has rolled 1 single assist. As Carthane is standing right next to Fecula, Robin can count that single assist, and therefore it's a tie. I don't do any damage, but again I can push him back. Other than that though, spell attacks are pretty much exactly the same as regular attacks.
Yes, if you get a crit, it counts as a critical success and can only be stopped by defensive criticals in the same way. One small thing to work out, and this is for all spells, but it's particularly good fun with a spell attack action, should your fighter roll a double crit, then spellcaster gets what's called backlash, which deals 1 damage to them. And that's if they roll 1, or that's if they roll 2, 3 or 4, it doesn't matter, it's still only 1 damage.
More than 1 crit.
More than 1 crit.
In this situation, I would take 1 damage. I would still succeed though because I have beaten Robin. I rolled 2 crits to his 1 success, and therefore I would still do damage and push him back. In the very rare circumstance, if Fecula had 1 wound left, that 2 crits will kill her, and she will die and not do any damage.
Exactly, she would die before the spell is cast, and and it would kill her.
There are some other key words that you need to take into account here as well. One of them is cleave. If you attack with a fighter that has cleave, then your opponent cannot count blocks or shields in their defense roll. In this example, Grashrak has cleave because he's inspired. Therefore, I roll the 2 dice and I get 1 hammer. Robin rolls a shield. That's a success.
Hooray.
But I've got cleave, which means he cannot count that shield as his success.
So the only way for me to succeed in this instance is to roll a crit.
Boom!
And then I would succeed. If it was Shayok was defending the attack, and I rolled a dodge on Pete's attack, then Shayok, because cleave only stops blocks and not dodge, it makes no difference. So that single success would count as a success, and Pete has failed that attack.
Yes. Now there are other things as well as cleave that can do. Another one is ensnare.
Okay, in this example, my elf Althean has come up to shoot Grashrak, and she has ensnare once she becomes inspired. So I have rolled a single success here, my hammer. She's rolling a 2 hammer attack. And Pete has tried to defend, but he's only rolled a dodge. And ensnare does for dodges what cleave does for blocks.
Yeah, my dodge has no use here.
So it's no good, so that's 0 successes. Pete does require a crit to succeed. So I would do 1 damage to Grashrak, and in this instance, I could push him back into the lethal hex, and he would take 1 damage. So that would be a 2 damage attack.
However, if he were attacking Draknar and I rolled a shield, his ensnare doesn't affect that at all, and that would be a success for me. So we would be tied and the attack would fail. Robin would still be able to push me back though, into the lethal hex and do 1 damage to me at least.
Absolutely, and I totally would. The final keyword, which none of the Beastgrave fighters actually have, is knockback. Knockback, I would say, is probably the least useful of the keywords, attack keywords, but it does come up from time to time, and it does have its uses. What knockback does is enable you to, if you successfully hit somebody, it enables you to push them back further than 1 hex. So let's imagine that Grashrak has attacked our Thayan here. I've rolled 0 successes, Peter's rolled 1, so you've rolled a successful attack, and you can push me back. You haven't killed me, you've done 2 damage, I'm not dead, and you can push me back. You don't have to push me back 1 hex, you can push me back 2 hexes because you have knockback. And knockback usually has a number after it. It'll be knockback 1 or knockback 2. Knockback 2 is very rare. In knockback 1, you can actually push me back 1 additional hex. So this is the pushback for 1, and the knockback for another. You maybe go back 2. If it was knockback 2, you would push me back right away back to here, because it would be 1, it would be 2 plus the usual pushback.
It is worth noting at this point that the knockback has to go in exactly the same direction as the initial pushback. So in this situation, if you have knockback 1, you put your initial pushback to there, you can then not do this. You have to make sure it continues on the same line as before.
And similarly, you can't do 1 pushback to there and then to there. It's the same. So if you knock back in this direction, your knockback is no use. And it's also worth iterating that you cannot use trapped in a similar way for knockback. You can't say, oh well, I wouldn't knock you back, and therefore you're now trapped, or she's not actually trapped, but and therefore there is no trap that doesn't relate to knockback. I think is what I'm trying to say.
Correct. If you can be pushed back the first hex, the initial pushback, then anything after that is a bonus and doesn't count towards being trapped. So it's just worth noting that in this specific example, I couldn't push you back around this corner because that would end up going in a different direction. I could only knock you this way.
Yeah.
If they're attacking this way round and I had a knockback of 1, I could either push you back 1, 2 that way, 1, 2 that way, or 1, 2 that way, taking you through the lethal hex and doing 1 wound.
And that would actually kill her because you've done 2 damage, and taking her through the lethal hex would do an additional damage, and she's only got 3, so she'd be dead.
So now we come on to one of the most fun aspects of the game, which is charging.
Charge!
Now to charge, you're doing what's called a super action. You're doing a move followed by an attack, and both of those elements follow exactly the same rules as the individual action. So for a move, you can't move through blocked hexes, you have to end in a different hex to where you started, you can't move through fighters, all of those kind of things.
Yeah, you still take damage if you move through a lethal hex. It is basically a movement action with a attack action appended afterwards. In this case, I'm going to charge Korsh, so I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4 to there. And I would get a charge token. Now, the charge token is subtly different to the movement token. As you can see, it has a little move hexagon on it, but then it has this one in a star, which basically means I've charged. Now, if this was the first activation of a round, I can no longer activate Skaeth again. If I had just moved and not done an attack, for some reason, I might want to do that. I've just moved. That's the end of that activation. Pete will do something in his activation, and when it's my activation again, I can attack. If you leave him there. Yeah. When it comes to my activation again, I can now attack him, and I could attack him. If assuming the move was in the first round of the game, I could attack another 3 times. Whoever was around, I could attack them because a movement does not prevent activation. The problem with doing that is, in all likelihood, if I did move up next to a fighter, Pete would, on his activation, would run away, and I can't move after whoever he's run away from. And it very much telegraphs what you're going to do. So the advantage of a charge action is that it enables you to run straight in and do the damage immediately with no possible reply. The disadvantage is that I would then have to stand there for the rest of the turn until we've all had 4 activations, and then the counters would be removed, and I couldn't move him on the next turn, but he's basically done for this activation. So you do have to think, especially with your key fighters like Skaeth is for the Wild Hunt, you do have to time your charges right, otherwise you can leave yourself open to all sorts of horrible attacks and things as your opponent takes advantage of the fact that you're effectively a sitting target for the rest of that turn.
Yes, a well-placed charge can win you the game, but a poorly timed charge can spell disaster.
Exactly, and sometimes you find you have to do it, and you just have to trust in the dice gods, which is normally when things start to go horribly wrong.
One thing to bear in mind when you charge is that you have to have line of sight once you've finished your movement. So right now there is a blocked hex here, and we're going to cover blocked hexes in line of sight in a moment, but right now Skaith cannot see Grashrak. However, I can declare a charge and move 1, 2 to there, and now he can see Grashrak and I can attack him.
Yes, that's quite different to other Warhammer games, I believe, where you can't necessarily charge somebody around a corner or something that you can't see.
You also don't need to declare who you're charging until after your move action. So if Robin were to move Skaith around like this, and I had a reaction that enabled me to run Grashrak away, well, he can still shoot at poor old Gnarl there.
Yeah, you don't say, I'm going to charge Grashrak. Grashrak runs away and you're not stuck there like a lemon. I could still attack Ashkor. If Ashkor wasn't there, then potentially Skaith would be stuck there like a lemon. He would have charged, but he would have nobody to fight.
Yes.
I don't think there's currently any cards that can produce that effect.
But it is worth noting.
It is worth noting. If we had a situation like this and Skaith just wanted to charge 1 and throw his spear, he can throw it at Ashkor or Grashrak. Fighters do not block line of sight or block attacks. So if you had somebody with a big spear attack, it wasn't even a thrown attack, it was just a 2-hammer, a range 2 attack from here, you could still attack Grashrak or Ashkor. It doesn't matter. Fighters don't get in the way, which again I think is a little bit counterintuitive if you've come from other Games Workshop games. One curious thing about charging, which I think confuses people who have come from other Games Workshop games, is that you can charge even if you already have been fighting or are adjacent to the fighter. In this case, if Skaith wanted to attack Draknar, who is one of the Despoiler's best fighters, he probably wants to make sure he kills him. If he rolls his scything attack, he'll only do 2 damage to Draknar. Draknar has 3 wounds, so he can't kill him. But if he could make the attack so that he could push him into the lethal hex, then that would kill Draknar. But he can't do it from here. If he pushes back, pushing into the lethal hex, it's not pushing him further away, so it wouldn't count. I have to move, and I am allowed to. I can charge. I can go 1, 2 to here. I would gain a charge token, so there is a risk associated with that. But now, if my attack is successful, then I would take 2 damage for Draknar, push him back into the lethal hex to do the 3rd, and would kill him. So what I really wanted to show there is that you can charge to the same person you already have been attacking. The only thing you can't do, because it's a movement, is you can't charge and finish in the same hex as you started. So you couldn't, for whatever crazy reason you might want to, you couldn't charge down here 2 and then go back 2, 3 to there. You wouldn't be allowed to do that. I don't know why you'd want to do that, but there might be a reason why you could, and you're not allowed to.
Yeah, in certain situations you might score objectives for making a charge attack action. So in this situation you wouldn't be able to go 1, 2 to charge and then kill Draknar.
No.
You would have to make sure that you went 1 or 1, 2 to there to actually end up on a different hex. In certain situations, line of sight can be important. If your fighter is adjacent to a target, then obviously line of sight isn't blocked there. And as mentioned before, if you have a fighter in between you and somebody else, they don't block line of sight either. But blocked hexes and incomplete hexes can block line of sight. In this example, we have to draw an imaginary line from the middle of Skaith's hex to the middle of Ashkor's hex. And if that line were to go over or touch the edge of a blocking hex, then his line of sight is blocked. So in this situation, he would not be able to see Ashkor to attack him. He also wouldn't be able to see him here because it takes the line straight through this blocked hex
and
here.
More obviously, he couldn't attack him here. He couldn't attack him here because it's the same as this reverse side, but he could attack him here. Where it gets a little bit more tricky is when you get further away from the blocked hex. So you definitely can attack Ashkor there because the blocked hex isn't in the way at all. And as Pete said, you can't do it here because you can't draw from the centre of the hex to the centre of the hex without going through this lethal hex. But if the fighter was here, Pete, what happens?
You can just about see him in this situation because the centre of this hex here passes over to the centre of this hex here without touching this blocked hex whatsoever.
So although that's kind of in the way, it still doesn't block line of sight. So Skaith could throw his spear at Ashkor there.
And it's worth noting that if there were intervening fighters in the way, none of these fighters stop him from being able to attack old Ashkor. If Skaith wants him dead in this situation, he's got a pretty good chance of making it happen.
Absolutely.
It's also worth noting that lethal hexes don't block line of sight in any way. You can attack across them or through them without any impediment whatsoever. There is one other slightly edge case scenario, like what I did there, with blocked hexes. Incomplete hexes can block line of sight in some situations. In this situation, however, they do not, because the line goes across the edge of this incomplete hex. And that's the distinction you have to make. If the line goes across the edge of a blocked hex, that blocks line of sight. But if it traces across the edge of an incomplete hex, that does not block line of sight. One of the last activations you can do is going on guard. It gives you one of these.
A guard token.
And as you can tell by the symbol on it, it has a block and a dodge symbol. And what that does is it now allows that fighter to class both dodges and blocks as successes when they roll defense. So in this situation, Skaith attacks Draknar, who's on guard, and he gets one sword success, and I roll a dodge. Normally a dodge isn't a success for Draknar, but because he is on guard, that still counts. The attack has failed, but in normal circumstances, Robin would be able to push me back. But again, because I'm on guard, he can't do that. Draknar cannot be pushed back because he is on guard.
That is a new addition to the rules in Beastgrave. Fighters on guard cannot be pushed back.
This can be quite useful if you're standing on objectives and you don't want to get pushed away and you want to remain where you're at, or maybe you're near a lethal hex like in this case, and you don't want to risk getting pushed back into a lethal.
Yes, there are a couple of points about guard that are worth mentioning. Fighters who have the dodge characteristic generally get a better advantage out of going on guard because they're going up from their usual only 1/3 of a chance just a dodge or a crit on the dice up to a whopping 2/3 because they're gaining the 2 blocks that are on the dice. If you're using blocks, you've already got a 50% chance of saving and you're just going up to a 66, a 2/3% chance because you're just gaining 1 extra dodge as a success. The other thing that's worth mentioning is actually there are lots of cards in the game now that put you on guard without using an activation. So it's quite rare, I think, in the Beastgrave game to actually see people put their fighters directly on guard because it uses an activation, and an activation generally is better for moving, charging or attacking.
Another thing to remember with guard is that you can be activated again in later activations, unlike with a charge. In this situation, Skaith has gone on guard and then Draknar has moved up in my activation. Robin can now charge Draknar with Skaith by running around like so. However, in this situation he would lose that guard token because if you charge, you lose the guard token. It gets replaced in this situation
with a charge token.
If Robin just moved Skaith, he would still retain his guard token. So you can move and go on guard, or guard and move and retain that. But if you charge, it removes your guard token.
Similarly, if Peter moved to here, I can see Pete from where I am, I can make an attack action, and that doesn't affect my guard. I stay on guard. So if you charge, you lose your guard token, but if you move or attack, you keep it. We do hope you found this useful. Do carry on following the videos in the series, and do let us know if there's anything you want to know about how to play, anything about the game play that you don't quite follow, then do ask in the comments and we'll do our best to answer it.
Until next time.